Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what I call the grand illusion of the current U.S. economy. You know those glowing green macroeconomic headlines scrolling across financial dashboards all day? Well, we're going to contrast those with the pretty grim personal realities happening right down on the ground. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the data says one thing, but your wallet feels something entirely different.
Okay, let's kick things off with a massive number, 23. The stock market has literally hit 23 record highs this year alone. Add in peaking home prices, and national net worth has never been larger. If you're looking purely at soaring candlestick charts and official numbers, this is undeniably one of the absolute richest moments in American history, on paper at least.
But you see, that perfectly illustrates the severe disconnect we're dealing with between the paper economy and the wallet economy. While market charts are soaring into the clouds, consumer sentiment, how people actually feel about their own finances, has absolutely crashed. It's lower right now than the early 80s recession, lower than the 2008 global financial crisis, and yeah, even lower than the pandemic lockdowns. Crazy, right?
You can see this tension up close when you look at the average 401k. Sure, balances are hitting record highs, yet roughly 6% of savers are raiding their retirement accounts early, and they're taking massive penalties just to survive. We're talking 36% pulling cash to avoid foreclosure or eviction, 31% covering medical bills, and 13% paying tuition. They aren't cashing out to buy yachts, guys. They're cashing out just to keep a roof over their heads.
So that brings us to our first major question. Who exactly owns the boom?
Now, what's really fascinating here is the stark divide. According to the Federal Reserve, the top 10% of households own roughly 87% of all stocks in the country. That leaves the bottom 90%, which is nearly 120 million households, by the way, holding just 13% of the market. So when Wall Street surges, those gains are highly concentrated.
And honestly, it gets even starker when you zoom in on the bottom half of Americans. The nurses, the bus drivers, the teachers, the people literally running the day-to-day operations of the country. Those 67 million households collectively own just 1% of the entire stock market. And just to be clear, that's not 1% each. That is 1% total, split among all of them.
Now, the usual pushback we hear is, well, everyone owns some stock now. And technically, yes, about 58% of Americans do own some stock. But there's a 48-fold gap in the actual value. The median holdings of the bottom half sit at a mere $13,000, while the top 10% are sitting comfortably around $600,000. Look, owning some stock and owning enough stock to actually build wealth are two completely different ballgames.
To put actual dollar figures to this gap, let's look at what a 16% market return actually does in the real world. For the bottom half, that's a $2,000 paper gain. Nice to have, sure, but it doesn't really change your life. But for the top 10%, that exact same 16% return hands them over $96,000 in a single year. The richest households directly benefit from the gains, while everyone else is essentially just watching from the sidelines.
Let's pivot now to part 2, the ground-level reality.
You hear this dominant narrative all the time on financial networks. The consumer is strong. But let's look at the money actually coming in. Recently, average hourly earnings were up 3.6%. Sounds like a solid raise, right? Well, until you look at the other side of the equation, where inflation was up 3.8% over that exact same stretch. Before the average American spends a single dollar, they're already losing ground. That raise was eaten before the check even cleared the bank.
And when you realize that cumulative prices are up over 28% since the start of 2020, the pain makes total sense. It's really no surprise that 55% of Americans say their financial situation is actively getting worse. Nearly a third of people cite the high cost of living as their single biggest financial problem, which puts us near the highest level seen in 2 decades. Which brings us to a massive contradiction in part 3, the survival debt crisis.
If personal finances are looking this grim, how on earth is consumer spending still going up? Well, the terrifying answer is that the money is coming from the future. It's coming from debt. Americans are now carrying an absolutely staggering $1.25 trillion in credit card debt. It's an unprecedented mountain of borrowing that's acting as the invisible engine for all that robust spending we keep hearing about.
And they certainly aren't borrowing for free. They're carrying this trillion-dollar burden at an average interest rate of 23%. Even scarier, 61% of people with credit card debt have been carrying it for over a year. Look, once you fall into a revolving debt trap at 23% interest, the math makes it incredibly difficult to ever escape.
We need to be crystal clear about what kind of debt this actually is. This isn't the wealthy chasing credit card points or airport lounge access. 33% of debt carriers cite basic, day-to-day expenses as their primary source of debt. They aren't financing a vacation, they're financing their daily existence. Economists have even coined a new, pretty dark term for this: survival debt.
We're even seeing this desperation in the massive rise of buy now, pay later installment loans. Over 90 million Americans use these apps now. They used to be for, buying a new couch or concert tickets, but now over a quarter of users rely on them just to buy groceries. Let that sink in. A significant chunk of the country is literally splitting their weekly food bill into 4 payments just to make it to Friday.
And the final, devastating proof that the safety net has essentially evaporated is the savings rate. For the bottom half of the country, those 65 million households, the savings rate is actually negative. This means they are spending more than they bring in after taxes. They're running a loss, sinking deeper and deeper into the red every single month.
So how do we visualize all of this? That's part 4, the E-shaped economy.
For years, you probably heard economists talking about a K-shaped recovery. But to truly understand the modern financial landscape, we need a brand new letter, the letter E. Picture 3 bars. The top bar is the ownership class, and their wealth is absolutely exploding through stocks and real estate. The bottom bar is the survival class, down near the floor, drowning in that survival debt we just talked about. But it's that middle bar we really need to pay attention to, because it is actively tilting downwards.
That downward tilting middle bar, that represents what we call the slipping class. These are the households whose raises were completely eaten by inflation. As chief economist Heather Long notes, we're seeing a massive migration away from premium grocery experiences, moving heavily toward discount stores like Aldi and Walmart. This class has a razor-thin layer of breathing room, and they can literally feel it evaporating.
Pulling it all together, let's look at the ultimate dashboard of American wealth. The top 10% of households are pulling rapidly away, capturing a massive 68% of the net worth. The middle 40% holds 29%. And the bottom half of Americans? They are left fighting over the remaining 2.5% of the country's total net worth.
The macroeconomic data is absolutely booming, yes, but when you look past the soaring charts to the negative savings rates and trillion-dollar debt piles, it leaves us with one final undeniable question. If the engine of the American economy is running on the fumes of survival debt, what exactly happens when the consumer finally maxes out their very last credit card?